I love going on adventures. I love seeking out new trails to go to explore. I love being in the nature and being in God's creation. It's actually a peaceful place for me. And sometimes when I'm walking along these trails, sometimes the trail comes to a fork. The path comes to a crossroads, and I could either choose to go to the left or I can go to the right. And sometimes the trail is not clearly marked. And I'm like, where do I go from here? I experienced something a few years ago, and I had gone on a camping trip up north, 6 hours from where I used to live. And it was on this vast property up in Bear Country, up in the Great Canadian Shield. It was a one-room cabin with no electricity and no water, and there was a box for the toilet on the outside of the cabin. Now, I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I love trying new things. So this was a great adventure. And on the full day I was there, I wanted to go exploring on their property. Now they had trail maps and they had markers out there. And so I began to follow one of these markers. This path was not clearly marked. You cannot, by looking at the ground, tell where to go next. And so I solely had to rely on the markers that they had on the trees. And so I would find the marker, walk to it, look around, find the next one, and continue on. Now it did connect to another path, another colored path, and so I would follow that. So I was following along, this path was better marked than the first one. At some point, I ended up on a wider path, clearly marked for also not just for walking, but for ATVs and such. And as I was walking, I was beginning to realize I actually didn't know where I was. I was beginning to realize that I lost track of those colored markers along the paths I was following. And I started to become a little bit anxious, a little bit weary of where I was, and realizing that maybe I was lost. Now, keep in mind, I'm following a clear pathway or whatever you want to call it. And I began to notice what was happening around me. I could hear the rustling of the leaves. I could hear the creaking of the branches, which made me a little bit more anxious. And then I heard a bird squawk in the distance, not too far away. I could hear it. I could hear its wings. And that just made it a little bit more intense. It just kind of went up another level. And so I ended up having to call the host of this property and saying, I think I'm lost. I have no idea where I am. And so he had me turn around and go back into a different direction. And so I'm walking fast and I come across a pond where beside the pond in the mud was a big bear print. Now, that didn't help at all, did it now? Everything intensified. I tried to walk as fast as I can, and I began to notice the colored markers again. So I knew I was heading in the right direction. But I was walking back. I came upon a lookout they had, a couple of them. And at this particular one, they had a cross in the rocks at the lookout. And it was at this point I knew I couldn't go on. My legs didn't have the strength to walk anymore. And so it was there that I decided to rest and wait for the host to rescue me. Now, it was a few months after this where God was showing me a lot of things about this experience and how it kind of related to what I had been walking through. And he was showing me things and how, things that had happened that got me into a place where I was. And how, because of this, that I was experiencing some of the things that I had. Now, when I look back, it was a good thing for me because it caused me to rest. It caused me to refocus. But you see, I took my eyes off Jesus. I was more worried about how I appeared to others. I was more concerned about what others thought of me. I was more concerned of being accepted, of being successful, that I lost who I was and whose I was. I lost my way as a daughter of the King. It actually felt like I was stuck. And I didn't know how to get out of that place. I didn't know how to get out of there. But you know what? God makes a way where we can't see a way. There's a story in Matthew chapter 14, and it's about the disciples. And Jesus had finished he had finished a miracle, and he was sending the disciples on their way in the boat over to the other side of the lake. And while they were in the boat, it became night, and a storm began to brew. And as the storm was brewing, Jesus came to them walking on the water. And at first the disciples were afraid. They didn't know it was Jesus at the time. But Jesus spoke out and he said, "It is I, don't be afraid." And Peter said to him, "If it's you, Lord, call me to come out to you." And so Jesus did. And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water. And when his eyes were on Jesus, he was walking, but he began to notice the wind and the waves around him. And I'm sure it was loud. I'm sure he was feeling the laps of the waves along his legs. And as he was noticing this, he began to sink. And he called out to Jesus, "Lord, save me." And Jesus was right there. He reached out and lifted Peter up out of the water. And he said, "Why were you afraid? Why did you doubt?" You see, when we take our eyes off Jesus, we begin to doubt, we begin to worry, we become anxious about what's happening around us. And you know, there's so many things in this world that would distract us from what God has for us, from the plan and purposes he has for our lives. Yes, good and bad. Yes, you know, some of the things that look good may not be good for us personally. They may feel like the right thing, but they may not be right for us. They can distract us from who we are truly in him. And you know what? The enemy would do anything he can to distract us and pull us away from what God has. And I know it can be difficult because there is a lot going around us and we desire to do a lot of things to be connected with people. And sometimes it's not good for us to do that. But you know what? We can be equipped to stand strong against these things. We can be equipped and have the knowledge of what to do in these situations. You know, just like the markers on these trails I was following, we have been given a tool book that will help us along the way, a guidebook to help us to learn and to grow, not only in the image of the Son, but to how to walk and live our lives out. But we have to pick it up each and every day. You know, just like I found a resting place at the foot of the cross, it became a safe place for me. The foot of the cross of Jesus is a safe place for us. And we need to make the time to spend with him. You know, when was the last time you sat at the feet of Jesus? When was the last time you set aside time to be with him? When was the last time you sat down and studied the word and not just read it? You see, many people will read the word of God, but not a lot of people study it. It's when we study it that we learn and we grow and we absorb his word into our lives. And then we use the word of God to help us stand strong. Whether you feel like you've lost your way or maybe you haven't, maybe everything is okay. Maybe you think you're on the right path. Remember my story of getting lost in the forest. I was following a path, but I was lost. And I encourage you today to set aside and to take some time, free from distraction, to come before Jesus and sit at his feet. Open up your heart, open up your eyes, open up your ears. Look, listen, and see what he wants to show you today. Sit in his presence. Open up his book. Open up the Bible. Not just read it, study it. And allow him to show you how much he loves you. Allow him to teach you. Be open to growing and learning. And discover the plans he has for your life. Let me encourage you to stand strong. Read his word. Keep your focus on him. Let this encourage you today. Love you, bless you, and have a great day.